So Mark is a retired information engineer who now spends his time volunteering where there is need. His career spanned 40 years in information technology and innovation, with emphasis on understanding how confidence works. And Mark, I don't think you've got a presentation, but you're going to hopefully have some discussion. Is that right? Yeah.
I'm hoping for discussions because what I'm about to say might not go down too well.
Yeah, maybe we just need to set some ground rules for this because it's a bit hard for the people on Zoom to participate as the people here in this room can. So perhaps the discussion, let's just try it on Slido initially in terms of comments, etc. We'll see how we go with that. Yeah, is everyone happy with that? Yeah.
I would welcome that.
Okay, over to you. Yeah.
Well, thank you. This was meant to be a lightning talk, but Dora has given me some extra time. So we are looking for discussions. So as you can see from my background, we're going for a walk. And I hope that you're not nervous with bridges like that one. And we're going to start, we're going to go along a path, we're going to look out, and then we're going to return another way back to our starting point. So I want to start by thanking Nigel Chapman and the talented team for their paper addressing trust and conspiracy theories. It's really a high quality paper, which I think ISCAST should build upon, and I hope to see more. And congratulations, Nigel, and congratulations, ISCAST. But whilst the paper's explored an obvious problem, having read it, I'm still uncomfortable about the way the story is told and where it fits into everyday life. So this is my response. And so I had to add some critical perspectives. I better say a little bit more about myself. I'm a child of the 60s. And my goal in life is to help people to try and think outside of the proverbial box that we have built ourselves into. And that was my trade, as it were, within my industry. I run that fine line between bringing words of encouragement and words that challenge and bring discomfort. And I hope I can do both today. So I'm also a child of the 60s. That means I'm a child of Woodstock. And I always remember Johnny Mitchell's song, I Came Upon a Child of God. He was walking along the road and I asked him, tell me, where are you going? That's the question I've got about this paper. I am not sure where this paper is going, nor where science itself is going. And we'll cover all these things in the next 10 minutes. Now, I can tell you I'm not going down to Yazga's farm and join the rock and roll band, though I do sometimes dream of it, but I'm going to walk my wife down to the local op shop. And I will carry on to another community food program where we volunteer. And here we confront the pit face of conspiracy theories. We're the experts. We hear it all. And you know what? It doesn't worry us. We don't see this as a battle for truth over the misinformed. We love these people. These are people who are made in the image of God. And that, yes, that image is very distorted at times. But you know what? The church knows what to do. And it's known what to do for ages. And of course, the paper actually knows that and actually makes recommendations very much in line with what I've seen churches do right throughout my life. For us, my wife and I, Lynn and I, we're about helping people find their self-identity within community, learning how to trust and learning how to discern beautiful things. And that's, of course, a lifelong journey of transformation. But it's a journey that my wife and I don't control, and we're only there to serve and point them to the Lord Jesus Christ. We do very little in many ways. We're Christians, and that's what we believe Christ would have us do. So we need to be careful. We have to recognize that we are all conspiracy theorists to some degree. And that's actually, if you read in between the lines in the paper, it's there. It recognizes that. And that needs to be brought into the daylight because trust is a precious commodity. Okay? Lack of trust is a good and normal thing because it's part of the complex environment in which we live. We just can't believe everything. So getting the balance right is done well by some and poorly by others. Our disadvantaged friends in the op shop, the friends that we love, do it poorly. But when you look at their lives, you understand why. And you want to defend them. These aren't the bad guys. Just a reminder that Solzhenitsyn says the dividing line of good and evil runs right down ourselves and not between scientists and conspiracy theorists. Just consider people with political views. Give me 5 minutes with anyone who has a political view and suddenly we'll have conspiracy theories. They're hidden very well. We're just educated people are very good at hiding them. There's this fine line that we must walk with people in dealing with people who push conspiracy theories. These ideas are very real to them. And are we to judge them or are we to serve them? That's the question I've got at the paper. And we all need transformation. So let's not try to take the speck out of other people's eyes. Now, the paper is well balanced and it recognizes that. I just feel uncomfortable that it doesn't make things, some of these things clearer. And it leaves the way open for people with logs in their eyes coming along to remove the speck. These people, conspiracy theorists are people to be loved, not to be fixed. So we're on our walk and there's a snake across the track. Now, for some people, there's fears. Others reach for a stick or weapon to get rid of the snake. But the snake just wants to be left alone. And my wife and I rejoice when we come across the snake when we're walking, but we also rejoice when we're able to help the poor, even when they have all sorts of issues. Poking a stick at snakes is only going to end up in trouble. Now, there's another perspective as we walk along, and one that's overlooked. Conspiracy theories are divisive within families and within churches, but this division's nothing new. Just mention the words family or church, and I think quite a lot of us will immediately think division. You see, the divisions are already there. So getting rid of conspiracy theories won't remove the stuff underneath. And I point people to the work of the great Black American economist, Thomas Sowell, in his book, A Conflict of Visions, where he says that for time immemorial, there have been two competing views in the world, and they are in conflict and always have been. And the source of most conflict in the world relates to the two visions. The first is the constrained vision. The second is the unconstrained. Constrained people are people who see that everyone is caught up in evil or sin, and that governments being made up of such people should not control people's lives. The role of government must be constrained and limited. And the role of government is limited anyhow, and it should be given limited authority, only to the extent that society hangs together, basically justice and rule of law and so on. Unconstrained people are people who see others as blank slates or neutral. There's no such thing as sin. Government's role is to mold them for the betterment of society. And government takes power unto themselves and guides us into a better life. So this idea, these two ideas, are in constant conflict. And you will find that a lot of conspiracy theory relates to various views of people who are constrained, pushing back on the unconstrained. Because what, if you haven't noticed, is that the unconstrained view, which has been held at bay for a long while, is now out off the leash. And we call it wokeism and various other terms, but it's been happening for about 50 years as we slowly moved into a world where that constrained people are losing. So when you have people like Pastor Cotton, which was mentioned in the paper, yes, conspiracy theory isn't driving him. He is truly, truly pained as he sees his view of the world, the constrained view of the world, being challenged by mostly younger people who have an unconstrained view of the world. And from his point of view, and I would sit on his side, would see that our young people are going to go down this path and it's going to end badly. And if you go and read Sal's next book, The Rise of the Anointed, you'll see where it all goes. So there's two perspectives on why I feel uncomfortable. But having reached the lookout point as we were, there are now some troubling questions. So what right does an informed person have in judging another person's poor thinking? Should better, and inverted commas, better people take over these poor people and fix them? Or perhaps, should we reframe the question? What responsibilities do informed persons have when they meet a person who they believe is misinformed? And another question, what level of confidence, that's my space, what level of confidence do we need to demonstrate before we can call the other person misinformed? And of course, the answer in this conference would be simply that science provides that authority base. Really? Quote, "It is simply no longer possible to believe much of clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians." That was the editor of the New England Journal for Medicine, Dr. Marshall Engel. Don't worry, the editor of The Lancet, Richard Horton, said, quote, "Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue." Perhaps we've just turned to the classroom, where the children are taught that gender is separate to sex and that the world's going to end in 10 years' time for whatever reason. But this is not political opinion. This is science. They're told that science tells them these things. If you've got some time, look into the ISCAST archives for the late Dr. Ian Hoare-Lacy, and I tip my hat to him, a wonderful chap. His series of notes on the whistleblower Dr. Peter Ridd and what happens. In science, you do not tackle power. But I personally like Gigi Foster's comment she made recently. Gigi Foster is an economist. I have a lot of time for economists, behavioural economist, so she has a lot to do with medicine, professor at the University of New South Wales. This is a view from the outside. Quote, "Scientists aren't people who stand for what the main power and interests say is the right thing. No, of course they're not. Yet, that is what seems to be happening." The issue is not that I found areas of concern, little points of things that we can criticise. The point is, science doesn't seem to worry about these things, and that is the giveaway. Scientists are happy to ignore these criticisms because they are caught up in a knowledge system. If science wants to be a source of authority, then it needs new standards. Consider this quote, again from Thomas Sal. "It is hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong." When do scientists pay for their mistakes? Interesting question. In my area, in the real world, you pay for your mistakes. Usually not financially, you're usually finding another job. Anyhow, this shouldn't surprise anyone. When you look at funding models for science at universities, the powerful business interests in joint ventures and the funding for certain lines of research, heavy government funding, and vested interests galore, do you expect anything else? Anyone in business, anyone in governance would say, well, we have a right old mess. And that's what we do have. So I would humbly but adamantly maintain that science has become patronised to the political and social movements of our day. If science is about finding truth, about the created order, and if technology is about doing good with that knowledge, then our techno-scientific worldview needs to stand apart from these controlling narratives. It hasn't. And for the everyday person, it means that access to the fruits of techno-science is controlled by socio-political forces well beyond their control. All you can do is go with the flow, because there is no way you can work out which bits to believe and which bits not to believe. And if you try and struggle with some of these things and you aren't careful, you end up in that broad bucket called conspiracy theorists. I want to round up. Let me say this. We've never had more scientists with more memory and more money than ever before. Orders of magnitude more. Yet when we look back over the last few decades, I challenge anyone to tell me of any major discovery that's been made. Science may have gained a lot of power and prestige, but it's lost its creative vision, and I would say it's lost its soul. Conclude. Thank you, Nigel, for your work. But when I step back, I don't see a big problem with conspiracy theories. Tackling conspiracy theories is probably only going to divide people even further. And you end up with the same fault lines and the same divisions. And the behaviour of science as a source of authority is a much bigger problem that must first be addressed. We don't want winners and losers. Rather, we want to develop people whose focus is away from the fears of contemporary society and directed towards the bigger question of how to live. Hope you've enjoyed the journey, and I do wonder what other people might think.
Thank you very much, Mark. We've got a couple of questions that have come in on Slido. The first one is just a very practical one. Where Nigel's paper can be found? Is it online, just for anyone to find?
ISCAST.org/conspiracy.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. There's one from Jonathan. How do we know if science is being politicised or not?
Well, that's a good question. And it relates to the question of confidence. And at this point in time, the answer is we don't. That was my point. We don't know what to believe. We don't know what to take hold of. What we can trust. That's the problem, because it's outside the scope of most people. That may not be an answer you're looking for, but that is the answer. And that's a problem that I've had to deal with many times working in information technology. And it's this level of confidence. But that's another subject.
Okay, thank you, Mark. There's another question. Are not conspiracy theories dangerous in some cases rather than harmless, i.e. anti-vaxxers versus deaths in elderly homes due to COVID?
Anti-vaxxers have been given a lot of attention in the last half hour or 40 minutes. It's an interesting question. The question to ask yourself is, do you know how an anti-vaxxer thinks? Because until you get there, until you understand that, then you can't criticize. And I don't think most people understand how anti-vaxxers think. So in a sense, I'm avoiding the question simply until someone can tell me how they actually do think that anti-vaxxers think.
I think maybe the question is more about the conspiracy theory itself, and the fact it can actually be dangerous.
Yes, I accept that, and the paper makes that point quite clear. There are some really silly things. Injecting yourself with bleach, for example, is probably not very healthy. Of course, yes, it does. That's not my point, though.
Now, so I'm just seeing where I am up to. So Jonathan says, thanks, I regrettably agree on many contentious issues where you can find scientists on both sides of the argument. Sorry, I thought there was another one I had missed. Bronwyn said, and I think it might have related to the earlier presentation as well. Bronwyn says, discussing with anti-vaxxers during lockdown, I ran into the problem of peer-reviewed junk journals, i.e. non-reputable journals, which are a huge trap. Do you have a comment on that, Mark?
Well, in the two quotes I gave, probably what are possibly the two top medical journals, and their editors have just walked away saying they wouldn't trust anything in them. Not that there's a lot of error there. It's just you don't know what's true. You don't know what's not. That's what they're saying. And that's a mess that science has gotten into. And perhaps we need a new way of doing science. That's my point.
Great, Mark. Thanks so much for turning your lightning talk into a half hour. You did well. Yeah. Sorry, Andrew.
I'd just like to, I haven't put it in here. Can I just check with Mark? I don't think the editors are saying it is not true. They're saying that a lot of science is not repeatable, and there's a difference there.
Okay, you're talking about the reproducibility problem.
Yeah.
And but that's not what was said. So if you read the words from Angel and from Horton, they didn't say that. They said it was wrong. Okay, that would have included the fact that more than half, and you go to someone like Ioannidis, who has numbers saying about 85% aren't reproducible. That's where we've got to in certain spheres. So the problem is actually bigger than the 50% that Horton gave.
I wasn't going to ask a question, but I was going to ask if, I don't know if Nigel has I don't want to put you on the spot, but yeah, I was just interested in whether, if you want to answer, if he has a response.
Yeah,
critique, I'd be interested to know.
Yeah, come up, Nigel, yeah, because it's better to...
Sorry.
We'll shut down though as soon as other people start appearing.
Thank you. It's good to get feedback. I'd, on behalf of myself and all the people who contributed, I do want to thank, Mark, that's it, for actually reading it quite carefully and noticing some of the nuances. I guess I would have two questions that I would ask in response to what's been said. One is the institutions of public knowledge in society, journalism, science, research, all of the public health, government decision, the courts, all the things that we rely on to say what's true and false in society. Is your position that they are generally too fallible to be useful, or is your position that they have self-correcting mechanisms which might be able to work, but are not doing so?
Okay. Come into my world, where it's 6 a.m. in the morning and the systems switch on. You know, over the weekend, we've just rolled out some one-line change to a piece of code. You want to make sure that the world doesn't fall apart. And we have various mechanisms to do that. When I look at science, those mechanisms are missing. So you have this funny social phenomena of, people like, and I don't want to run him down, but someone like Suzuki, who is made a business out of every 10 years saying that the world's coming to an end in 10 years for reason X. It doesn't. So he just changes the reason and says in another 10 years. And he's been doing this a lifetime. Now, I mean, people like that exist in business as well. But why do we give people credence when they're shown to be wrong? At least in the first time, you may give them a little bit of a chance, but why give them air? And I look at the problems so differently. I have to make things work and work properly. Scientists don't necessarily have to do that. They just write papers. And I'm not running down scientists because this is how it works. But, as Sal says, at what point will you be considered as failing? And I think there's an answer to that if you get caught doing something illegal, such as falsifying results. But if you don't do that, and your research just ends up being wrong, what's the consequence? In my business, there are big consequences, but not so in science. So that's my answer.
Why does flanneries keep coming up on the ABC?
But could I respond to that by asking, do you feel that science as a whole is able to sort of take a great many inputs as candidates for knowledge and then filter them down through a process of criticism or just neglecting the ones that don't gain traction to form a generally accurate view of the world? Or are you saying that it is fundamentally all messed up?
My idea of science is very Popperian. So I think you probably know what that means, but for the audience, that science is not driven by consensus. It's not driven by anything other than the creation of radical ideas. Is this how the world is? And then going and testing those and showing whether they're true or not. So that's my idea of science. That may be an old idea. Of course, Kuhn came up with his idea that says it's actually a social phenomenon. But I hold to a traditional view of science, that stuff should be put up and tested. And that's what we do in business.
I work in software myself. I'm familiar with the release cycle and so on. Well, one final question. When it happens that conspiracy theories are the grounds for, really bad destruction in a community, say, people leaving churches, families splitting apart, as sometimes occur. I give some examples at the start of the paper. What do you think should be the right response to that situation?
There is no response to that situation. The problem has probably existed well before then. There will be something else at the root of it all, something that could be quite philosophical. It could be quite a genuine split because there's some deep-rooted difference of view, and it's usually worldview. And it's too late. The conspiracy theory is the outcome of something which is much deeper.
Very well. Well, that's all I wanted to ask in response to your talk. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to see what the other group was doing. And I think, Matthew, our next speaker, he's still just trying to get enough megabytes or whatever they're called, bandwidth to upload his slides. So maybe we'll just have you people online, we might just have a break for...
And then start back with... Can we make the best use of Mark? I but I expect, because he's a professor of geology, and the climax is going to occur shortly about the implications of CO2 being tragic for us. He will come and hear the debate about whether CO2 is actually creating a risk for us. Is going to come forward very soon, and we won't be ready for it. Anyway.
Did you hear that one, Mark?
No, I didn't hear the question, sorry.
Didn't hear the question.
Come up a bit, John.
Oh, right.
Given we seem to have some time,
I expect, not for necessarily good science reasons, but because, as you said, the scientists aren't always right, and they're not always on the ball about results and what's going to happen. But politically, and also for me as a geologist and for Professor Fleimer from this university, he wrote a tome with many citations. And because we've been persisting that there is going to be a climax, a catastrophe associated with CO2, that debate will come back again. It won't be considered to be, if you like, accepted science. It will come back very shortly. It won't be considered accepted science, right? I'm just saying it, and I'm interested in your comment. And we've got to be ready for it, whether we agree with it or not. What might come back? The debate about whether CO2 is creating a risk in the world will come back very soon because it's not established. The public will tell you, the media will tell you, and they're hammering away for 2 decades. But it will come back. And it may come back partly for political reasons. But it will come back.
If I could make a comment, I mean, we live in uncertainty. That has been my business. When you switched on those systems at 6 a.m. on Monday morning, it can be a frightening experience, especially when it's a very large systems as I dealt with. The uncertainty gets to you. So when it comes to something like climate science, the scientific consensus is that there is a lot of uncertainty. But within the public sphere, that's not an acceptable message. So it needs to be managed. And that's where all the problems begin. I have no problem with climate scientists, but I do have a problem with how that work is taken and put into contemporary society.
Mark, thanks so much for your time and your very interesting critique. We appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You think this side of it.